check your bank account again. Nothing has changed since this morning. You do the math on your salary, your rent, your savings rate, and it never quite adds up the way you want it to. You tell yourself you need to earn more. That's the real problem, right? But the real answer is far stranger than that. In a small town in Vermont, a man spent his whole life earning almost nothing. He pumped gas, he swept floors, he wore the same worn coat for years, held together with a safety pin. And when he died, he left behind more money than most doctors, lawyers, and executives will ever see in their lifetimes. His name was Ronald Read. You've probably never heard of him. Almost no one had until the day his will was read. Ronald grew up on a small farm outside Dummerson, Vermont during the Great Depression. His family didn't have much. Money was something you stretched, not something you spent. He walked 4 miles to school every day, rain or snow, because there was no other way to get there. After high school, he didn't go to college. He didn't need to, he thought. He needed a job. For over 25 years, he pumped gas and fixed cars at a filling station.
Later, he swept floors and stocked shelves at a JCPenney department store, working there part-time well into his 70s. He drove an old, dented Toyota. He cut his own firewood to heat his house. Neighbors remember him wearing a coat so worn that he pinned it shut instead of buying a new one. By every visible measure, Ronald Read was poor, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of man you'd walk past on the street without a second glance. So how did a janitor end up with $8 million? Here's where the story stops looking like a fairy tale and starts looking like a lesson in psychology. Ronald didn't win the lottery. He didn't inherit a fortune. He didn't take one wild risk that happened to pay off. What he did was almost boring. He read the newspaper every day, specifically the business section, and he studied it the way other people study a hobby. He picked stable, well-known companies, Procter & Gamble, General Electric, Johnson & Johnson. Then he bought their shares, and he did something almost nobody else does. He held them for decades, sometimes as long as 60 years. Think about that for a second. While the market crashed in 1987, in 2000, in 2008, while headlines screamed about panic and collapse, Ronald Read did nothing. He didn't check his portfolio every hour. He didn't sell in a panic. He didn't chase the next hot stock everyone was talking about at the diner. He just let his money sit there and grow, quietly, invisibly, year after year, while he kept pumping gas. Why does that matter so much? Because of a force that almost nobody truly respects until it's too late to use it fully. Compound interest. Albert Einstein reportedly called compound interest the 8th wonder of the world. And whether or not he actually said those exact words, the math behind it is very real. Compound interest doesn't just add to your money, it multiplies it, using its own past growth as fuel for future growth. A small amount left alone long enough doesn't just grow, it snowballs. Here's the strange part. Ronald Read wasn't a genius investor. He wasn't picking obscure companies before they exploded in value. His picks were ordinary, well-known businesses that most financial advisors would call boring. What made the difference wasn't brilliance. It was time, patience, and a complete absence of panic. Researchers who study money behavior have a name for the pattern Ronald followed, almost by instinct. In their landmark research on the habits of American millionaires, Thomas J. Stanley and William D. Danko found something that surprised even them. Most self-made millionaires didn't get there through high income. They got there through discipline, consistent saving, and living below their means for decades. Stanley and Danko discovered that flashy spending was often a sign of the opposite of wealth. The truly wealthy, in their data, tended to look almost exactly like Ronald Read. Quiet, frugal, unbothered by appearances. Why does that feel so counterintuitive? Because everything around you is built to convince you otherwise. Every advertisement, every social feed, every glossy magazine tells you that wealth looks like something. A certain car, a certain watch, a certain vacation photo. But the psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how the human brain makes decisions about money, and his research on cognitive bias helps explain exactly why so many people struggle to build wealth even when they earn a good income. Kahneman's work on loss aversion shows that people feel the pain of losing money roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining the same amount. That single bias explains almost everything about why people panic sell during a crash, why they chase trends out of fear of missing out, and why patience feels so unnatural, even when it's mathematically the smarter move.
Ronald Read, without ever reading a psychology journal, seemed to sidestep that bias almost entirely. He wasn't driven by fear of missing out. He wasn't checking prices daily, torturing himself over small dips. He simply trusted the process he had built, and he let time do what time does. So what did he actually do with the money? This is the twist that turns his story from a personal finance case study into something closer to a lesson about character. When Ronald Read died in 2014 at the age of 92, his portfolio was worth just over $8 million. His family had no idea. His stepson later said he was stunned to learn the true size of the estate. Ronald had never mentioned it.
He never used it to impress anyone, never upgraded his lifestyle, never told the people at the gas station or the department store where he worked. And in his will, he left the bulk of it away. Roughly $4.8 million went to Brooks Memorial Library in his town. Around $1.2 million went to Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. A man who spent his life quietly pumping gas ended up quietly funding the future of an entire community without ever asking for recognition. Why didn't he spend it on himself? That question sits at the center of everything his story teaches. For Ronald Read, money was never really about consumption. It was about security first and contribution second. He didn't need the outside world to see his wealth to know it existed. He didn't need validation that most people crave from their bank balance.
Here's the modern mirror. The part of this story that isn't really about Ronald Read at all. It's about you. You live in a world engineered to make patients feel foolish. Every app on your phone is optimized to reward instant gratification. Every investment platform makes it easy to check your balance 40 times a day, tempting you to react to every small dip, every red arrow on a chart. The financial industry profits when you trade often, when you chase trends, when you feel like doing nothing is the same as doing something wrong. But Ronald Read's entire fortune was built on doing nothing at exactly the right moments for an extraordinarily long time. What would happen if you treated your own savings the way he treated his? Not chasing the next hot stock, not panicking during every downturn, just choosing a handful of solid, understandable investments, and then getting out of your own way for years, maybe decades. It's uncomfortable to sit with because it means the biggest obstacle to building wealth was never really your income.
Ronald Read never earned more than roughly the equivalent of a modest income by today's standards, and he still built an 8-figure fortune. What separated him wasn't the size of his paycheck, it was the size of his patience. You still check your bank account. Nothing has changed since this morning. But maybe that's not actually the problem anymore. Maybe the real answer was never about earning more today. It was about becoming, quietly, the kind of person who lets tomorrow compound.